when you start with the end in mind, you have more clarity around how you can develop your presentation. Your presentation or your speech is going to be around reinforcing that one point. It's about reinforcing the one point with the structure, with stories, with your presence, with the engagement. Everything that you do is around that one point, that big topic that you're trying to get people to understand and to buy into. So when you start with the end in mind, it gives you clarity when you're putting together your speech. It gives you clarity in terms of how you should start your speech, but it also gives you your audience clarity in terms of what they can expect and why they should listen and pay attention. So you get all of that clarity when you start with the end in mind. You're listening to the Grind and Gratitude Show. Welcome to the Grind and Gratitude Show. If this is your first time tuning in, thank you so much. If you're an avid listener, you already know I got a lot of love for you. So in this episode, I want to talk to you about something really important, and it's all about how to start your speeches, why it's important to start a certain way, why it's important to even sit down and write out your speech in a very specific way. I'm going to tell you all that in a minute. But before I get to that, I have to say this. I am Danny Stone, also known as Coach Stone, is in the building. I help hero entrepreneurs speak to make more impact, income, and influence so that they can attract their ideal customers and clients. And I love doing this. I love helping entrepreneurs. I love helping business owners learn how to speak, not just in a confident way, not just in an engaging way, but speak in a way that they attract their ideal customers and clients and make them lean into their businesses and buy their products and their services. That's what I love to do. Now, this topic is going to be a very interesting one because a lot of people that I know who have to give presentations in their jobs or have to give speeches or talks find it very nerve-wracking. They find it very difficult. And I get it because public speaking isn't something that comes natural in a sense to all of us. And a lot of people have this fear of public speaking, or they're really uncomfortable with speaking. And I understand that. I completely get that. But I think one thing that you can do to make it a lot easier and to make your speeches and your talks and your presentations more engaging, more memorable, and to get people's attention right away is what I'm going to talk to you about today. And the one thing that I want you to know, and this is what I really want to talk to you about today. If you're giving a presentation, a speech, a talk, one thing that I want you to know, you have to start with the end in mind. Start with the end in mind. Now, you're saying, why? So many people sit through tons and tons of presentations, of speeches, of keynotes. Like so many of us sit through a lot of presentations, right? And over the last few years, a lot of those presentations have been virtual. And moving forward, we're probably going to have more presentations, speeches, and talks virtually and in person. So one of the things that we have to understand is that people are sitting through a lot of presentations, a lot of meetings, a lot of talks, and they're just tired. They're fatigued, right? And part of the challenge is in a lot of these meetings or presentations or keynotes, some of the people aren't clear right away about their topic. And so they might just jump into the meeting or jump into the presentation or jump into the speech, and they're talking all over the place. And maybe you as the listener, or if you're speaking to an audience, the audience is racking their brains trying to figure out, what is this topic? Why is it important? And why do I need to pay attention? And so for a lot of people, they might not get that until the end of the presentation or the end of the speech. And so you're making their minds work a lot harder than they actually have to. And so we have to learn to start with the end in mind. And Stephen Covey said this in the book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I think that was his second habit number 2. He said, begin with the end in mind. And it's because you have to think about what is it that you want people to get out of your talk or out of your speech, right? What is that? You have to know that up front. Before you even start crafting your speech, you need to know that. So here's kind of like 3 points in terms of why you need to start with the end in mind. The first point is that you start with the end in mind because it's going to make it more clear for you. It's all about clarity. Starting with the end in mind gives you clarity. Now you're saying, Coach Stone, clarity in terms of what? Hold on, I'm going to tell you. But clarity in terms of the topic that you're going to be speaking about. See, sometimes we sit down and we just start writing out a speech, or we're writing out a talk, and we're thinking about all the things that we want to say, and it ends up being all over the place. It doesn't flow well. There's no beginning, no middle, no end. We just start writing. And sometimes that's actually how people deliver their speeches. They're all over the place because they don't have any clarity. So when you sit down and you say, look, what is the one message that I want to leave the audience with? What's the one message I want them to walk away with? If I could only say one thing to that audience, to those people in the meeting, at the presentation, if I could only say one thing, what would that message be? That's where you want to start. That's where you want to start writing down your speech. That's where you want to start thinking about what you want to say. That's where you want to start when you actually deliver. You start with the end in mind. If you've ever seen a really powerful speaker or a keynote, or you've been to a talk, or you maybe even saw something on YouTube where it was a really powerful talk, a really powerful speech, think about how it started. That person was trying to sell you on the idea of a new way forward, a new life, something different. They told you up front what they were going to tell you, what the conversation was going to be about. They said, look, here's the way forward. Here's the new future. So you knew right away what to expect. So you have to do that for other people. You have to help them understand what it is that you're going to be presenting so that they can wrap their minds around it. But it also helps you in your preparation, because now when you start with the end in mind, you have more clarity around how you can develop your presentation. Your presentation or your speech is going to be around reinforcing that one point. It's about reinforcing the one point with the structure, with stories, with your presence, with the engagement. Everything that you do is around that one point, that big topic that you're trying to get people to understand and to buy into. So when you start with the end in mind, it gives you clarity when you're putting together your speech. It gives you clarity in terms of how you should start your speech, but it also gives you your audience clarity in terms of what they can expect and why they should listen and pay attention. So you get all of that clarity when you start with the end in mind. The second reason you want to start with the end in mind is you hook the audience's attention. When you come out and you say, here's what I'm going to tell you today. I'm going to show this to you. We're going to engage. We're going to have a conversation. You hook them right away. And as I said, a lot of people have been sitting through presentations and meetings and keynotes, and they're fatigued. They're tired because in some of those speeches or talks, they've had to figure out what the topic was, how it applies to them, how it applies to their job or their business or their life. You're not going to do that. When you start with the end in mind, you're going to hook them right away so that they want to lean in and pay attention and engage with what you're saying. That's the power of starting with the end in mind. So that's the second reason. You want to hook people's attention. Again, we know people have short attention spans. We know that people don't have a lot of time and energy to sit through meetings and keynotes and all of these things to try to figure things out. They want you to tell them what it is that you're talking about, why it's important, and how it's going to make their life better. And you do that with the hook right at the beginning of your speech and your talk. That's really powerful. And then people can decide if they want to lean in and pay attention or not, but at least you're laying it out for them so that they know you're hooking them in right away. You're getting their attention right away. And I think that's what's missing from a lot of speeches. People are talking all over the place and they're waiting to get to the end to try to really let people know what it is that they're saying when you need to hook them. So when you start with the end in mind, you're hooking people in. You're getting their attention right away. And that is so, so important and so valuable because you're speaking for a reason, right? You're trying to engage them. You're trying to get them to do something different. You're trying to get them to buy your products or your services or to understand your ideas or to get them to change their situation or change their life or their business or their careers. You're standing there speaking for a reason. And it can be, you can have a really great, powerful message, but if you don't catch people's attention right away, you're going to lose some of those individuals and you might not be able to get their attention back. So that's the second reason you want to start with the end in mind when you're giving a speech or a presentation. The third reason is you get to reinforce your point, your call to action at the end. So when you start with the end in mind and you let people know this is what your presentation is all about, the big topic, you hook their attention, you get them engaged and wanting to listen, you're also setting up your ending. You're setting up the call to action at the end. And so you actually close that loop for people. And as humans, we want that loop closed, right? It's like reading a book. You want to get to the end to find out what happens. It's like watching a TV show or a movie. You always want to know how it ends. It's just in our nature as humans. We need that loop closed. We need to understand how things kind of tie in together and wrap up. So when you start with the end in mind and you come back and you reinforce that at the end with a call to action, it's really, really powerful. And for me, that's one of the areas that I didn't do that well. I would stand up and I would start with the end in mind. And I would have some really great, powerful stories and engage people. And I would do all these things in my speeches. And then I would say, oh, thank you so much for your time. Take care. And people would go away pumped up, energized. And then maybe a few days later or a week or two later, they would be thinking about my speech. And then they would start thinking to themselves, what was I supposed to do again? That was a really great speech, but Coach Stone didn't really leave me with any tools to move forward. There was no call to action. I don't know how I'm supposed to take this information and apply it. So I wasn't really good with that. I had to work at that and I'm still working at it. But that call to action at the end reinforces what you said at the beginning. And you're giving people an invitation to the new way forward. And that's what people really want. Like they're coming to hear you speak to be edutained, right? Educated and entertained. But they also want new information. They want to know how it's going to help them personally or professionally. And then once you lay that out, it's like, well, what are the steps that I can take? How do I go deeper? How do I buy your products or your services? Or how do I connect with you? Or how do I take action on the next steps that I'm supposed to do? So that's the power of starting with the end in mind, because you're actually starting to set up the call to action at the end. And that's what people want. They want to take action. They want the new way forward, even if they're resistant, even if they're hesitant, even if they are skeptical. If you paint the picture throughout your speech and your talk, even if there's a possibility, then some of those individuals may take action. So those are the reasons that you really want to start with the end in mind. When you're writing your speech or preparing your speech or your talk, always start with the end in mind. And what is that one point, that one thing that you want people to leave with? And it's really important to do that because I've gone to speak, at radio stations and TV stations and speak in front of audiences and other people's platforms. I've been on other people's podcasts. I've been in all these different situations where I had the opportunity to speak to audiences. And there have been times where I was supposed to have an hour or 30 minutes or 20 minutes and it got cut down. And I had to think quickly, okay, what can I cut out? What do I want to leave people with? And the great thing about all of that is every time I started with the overarching idea. I started with the end in mind. So even if my time got cut, I was able to start with that one big message. And then I could cut out other things. And so that's something that may happen to you as you start speaking more, as you start getting more opportunities, as you start getting out there and talking about your businesses or your products or your services. You may have access to OPAs, other people's audiences, and your time might get cut short or something may happen. But if you start your speech with the overarching message, when you start with the end in mind, then at least they're walking away with the most powerful message that you want to leave them with. So that's why you want to start with the end in mind. I want you to think about this as you're moving forward, as you're preparing your speeches and your talks, and you start talking more about your products and your services or your cause, whatever it is that you're talking about, always start with the end in mind. Start with that big idea. Start with the one thing that you want to leave the audience with, because everything flows from there. The rest of your speech is based on that. Your intro, your closing, the middle, everything is based on that. So start with the end in mind. All right. I hope this makes you feel a little bit more comfortable. Look, I know public speaking is challenging. I remember the first few times that I stood up there mumbling and fumbling around. And, over time, I gradually got better and I'm still improving. Anybody who stands up and is telling you that they've mastered public speaking and they have it all figured out and they never get nervous and they're just a pro and they're never continuing to learn, don't believe them, because we're all continuing to learn. We're all getting better. There's always different things you can do. Every audience is different. So there's always something that we can do. So I hope this was valuable for you. I hope you can take this lesson. And again, the next talk, the next speech that you're giving, the next conversation that you're hosting, start with the end in mind. You want to get more clarity around all of your points so that it supports the big overarching message. You want to hook them in by starting with the end in mind. And then you want to close that loop at the end with a call to action. All right. And my call to action to you is, if you love this podcast and you love this episode, please like it. Please share it. Please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It will really, really help me a lot. So that's it. That's all I'm going to drop on you. I know it was really good, right? It was 3 great points that I think will help you, right? If you agree, do one of those things that I just said, or send me a direct message on Instagram at I am Danny Stone. I love hearing from you. Thank you so much for being my co-host. That's it for now. I will catch you in the next episode. Take care, everyone.